Last week, I can't remember, I think I didn't talk to this group so much about it, but in the Portuguese practice, I spoke a little bit about crazy wisdom because somebody had asked about crazy wisdom. And there are many great masters in our tradition that were on the level of practicing crazy wisdom, such as Drukpa Kunli and uh, Geshe Ben, another great Lama who's very, very famous was Patrul Rinpoche, who wrote Words of My Perfect Teacher, which I'm sure many of you have read. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you do. It's a very extensive manual on Nundro practice. But there's another book called Enlightened Vagabond. It's the collected stories of Patrul Rinpoche's life. And they're incredibly inspiring, beautiful stories. And I chose a couple of them to read to you this morning that are sort of mild examples of crazy or unorthodox wisdom being a kind of a behavior or speech that goes against normal patterns and thinking of ordinary people, that usually we're just obsessed with the 8 worldly concerns of getting rich and being famous and avoiding criticism and avoiding suffering, trying to find nice things, trying to avoid bad things. And when great masters exhibit crazy wisdom, it sort of turns all that on its head, and we see how ridiculous it is, our ordinary concerns. So here's one story I thought was very inspiring. It's called Patrul Rinpoche Acts as a Servant. Now, Patrul Rinpoche was very, very famous in Tibet, considered one of the greatest living masters of his time in the late 1800s. But there was no internet or newspapers or photographs in Tibet, so nobody knew what Patrul Rinpoche looked like. So he could travel around completely anonymous, and he took great advantage of that capacity. So in this case, once Patrul Rinpoche was returning home to Zachuka so that he could circumambulate the Mani wall. A Mani wall is a wall that's made out of stones that have the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum carved into the stones. So there's hundreds of thousands of these stones. Oh, hi, Valeria and York. Good morning. Wonderful to see you guys here. Lee, Fabricio, good morning. So Patrul Rinpoche was going to this Mani wall to do circumambulations around the Mani wall. It just so happened that an old blind woman lived there. And when Patrul Rinpoche walked by her house, she invited him to come in to stay. So Patrul Rinpoche offered to serve her as her servant, working for room and board. Every day he faithfully served her and made himself useful to her, making and pouring her tea, emptying out her bedpan, and doing whatever else needed to be done. Every day, the old woman would recite her prayers out loud, and she would supplicate the most famous Lama of the region, who happened to be Patrul Rinpoche, repeating, "O Patrul Rinpoche, with your compassion, please think of me." Every day, Patrul Rinpoche worked hard as the blind woman's servant, and every day after work, he would go to the Mani wall and circumambulate and do his practice. Over a month passed in this routine. One day, some of Patrul Rinpoche's disciples came to the Mani wall and saw Patrul Rinpoche doing circumambulations. Recognizing him, they began to do prostrations to him. The old woman happened to be sitting nearby. Although she was unable to see what was happening, she was able to hear what was being said, and she heard them referring to her servant as Patrul Rinpoche. Learning his true identity, she was so embarrassed that she would not allow Patrul to continue doing as he had done. At this, Patrul Rinpoche scolded his students sharply, saying, "Your thoughtless speech has done great harm to this poor old blind woman, because now Because of you, she has lost a devoted servant. Here's another story. Once, late in the afternoon, the wandering beggar, Patrul, arrived at a small nomad encampment. He saw a young nomad girl who was milking. Oh, wait. Yeah, that's it. He saw a young nomad girl who was milking her yaks, and he asked if he might take shelter there for the night. He was on his way to a local monastery to teach the way of the Bodhisattva. So remember, once again, he was completely anonymous. Nobody knew who he was, so he could travel freely. But he had the appearance of a beggar. He would wear ripped old robes. The girl told him that she would ask her mother and went inside the tent to do so. Her mother looked out of the tent and looked at Patrul Rinpoche with suspicion. She said to her daughter in a warning tone, "You know, that sort of homeless beggar could very well be carrying some kind of infectious disease, or he might even be a thief." The mother hesitated, thought about it, and then finally said, "Okay, tell him he can stay in the tent, but he has to sleep way over there in the corner." So they gave him some sampa with hot tea, which he was very grateful to receive as it was very cold. Patrul did as he was asked and went to the far corner of the tent as instructed. He recited his prayers and then settled down to go to sleep. The little girl noticed that for warmth, Patrul Rinpoche only had his clothes and no blanket or bedding. So she asked her mother if they had anything to give Patrul to keep him warm. "Well, we have that old rolled up sheepskin, but it's full of lice. But I suppose it's better than nothing." So the nomad daughter unrolled the old sheepskin and gave it to Patrul, who gratefully took it and put it over himself. The mother and daughter lay down to go to sleep on the opposite side of the tent. As the mother was settling down to sleep, she felt a little tickle on her waist. Throwing off her bedding, she discovered a lice crawling around her waistline. Very gently, she picked up the lice and gave it to her daughter, saying, "Take this lice, wrap it up in a bit of wool for the night. Tomorrow morning, take it outside and put it somewhere safe, out of the sunlight. Throw it someplace where it won't die." Suddenly, Patrul Rinpoche said, "Throw it someplace where it won't die? If there's a place like that, would you please throw me there too?" There are just wonderful stories in this book. If you have a chance to pick it up, I highly recommend it. Once again, it's called Enlightened Vagabond: The Life and Teachings of Patrul Rinpoche by Matthieu Ricard. It also reminded me of a story. When we were living in Chagdud Ling, Lama Norbu was doing some work on his house, and he needed some help. So word went around in the local village, and a man appeared with a machete, saying that he could help Lama Norbu. I think Lama Norbu was clearing out some forest, some undergrowth. So they were working nicely for a few days, and Lama Norbu was getting along very well with this guy. But then some of the employees of Chagdud Ling told us that he was a known murderer in the region. He'd killed at least 2 people with a machete. So finally, they told Chagdud Rinpoche the situation, and Chagdud Rinpoche thought about it, and he said, "You know, it's not safe to have him working here." So he called Lama Norbu down, and he told Lama Norbu, "This man is a murderer. He's a known murderer, and it's not safe for him to be here. So I want you to fire him." And Lama Norbu said, "Oh my gosh, I have to fire this guy. He has a machete. I have no idea how he's going to react. He might attack me." So he thought about it, and prayed and prayed and prayed. And finally, he took up the courage and he gave the guy a present. I don't remember what he gave him, but he gave him some kind of a gift. He said, "Thank you so much for working with me. I want to give you this gift, but I also want to teach you another gift, which is I want to teach you about the law of karma." So they sat down together in the forest, and Lama Norbu gave him a fairly lengthy explanation on karma. And then he paid him for the whole month of work that he hadn't completed yet. He paid him extra, and he wished him the best and sent him away. And they left on very, very good terms, and the man was very grateful for the teaching on karma. And as far as I heard, he never committed another crime in that area. I never heard any other news of him harming anybody. So maybe through Chagdud Rinpoche and Lama Norbu's kindness and blessing, maybe he turned his life around. I hope so. But anyway, I was reading a story about Patrul Rinpoche one time who came upon a murder scene. And I remembered that story about Lama Norbu. So we were reading about the Tsok offering practice and how we visualize our body as the mandala of the deities and our outer extremities as the protectors as we partake of the Tsok. That way we make an offering to the entire mandala of the peaceful and wrathful deities. Through its very nature, Tsok creates a sixfold satisfaction. The deities are satisfied by the offerings. The practitioners are satisfied by the food and drink. The wisdom mandala is satisfied by the subtle essence of nectar. The deities of one's own body are satisfied by the pristine awareness of bliss and emptiness. The dakinis on the outer and inner levels are satisfied by the offering of song and dance. The Dharma protectors who carry out activities are satisfied by the offering of the remainders. The Tsok is offered within the context of the three concepts. The first concept is that the Lama is understood to be the Heruka, which means the embodiment of all phenomena, inseparable from emptiness. The second concept is one's fellow participants are understood to be masculine and feminine deities. And the third concept is the Tsok substances are understood to be the substances that confer spiritual blessings. The Tsok is performed after the mantra section of the transformation into the wisdom body of Tara, but before the dissolution. Recitation of the two-line Jetsun prayer takes place as Tsok is being passed around, and other prayers of aspiration, including the origin prayer at the end of the book, and those for the longevity of the Lamas, may be included.